The handwriting expert took the stand on a Wednesday morning. By the time the testimony had begun, my uncle's attorney had stopped looking at his client. But the story begins with my grandfather, and it is with him that it ends, threading through every choice, every estate, every expectation. The lawsuit, the courtroom tension, the scrutiny of every signature. The moment my cousin Damon walked out without a glance, these were the distances between who my grandfather had been and the narrative the family chose to believe after he was gone. Ezra James Whitmore was born in 1938 in Meridian, Mississippi, the second of 4 children. At 19, he left with $40 and a Greyhound ticket to Detroit, working 6 years on the line at Ford before moving into skilled trades and later small-scale property management. Through discipline, timing, and what I can only describe as strategic patience, he advanced into real estate ownership that surprised everyone who had watched his earlier steps. By the time he was 60, Ezra owned 14 properties in the greater Detroit area, 8 residential rentals, 3 mixed-use commercial buildings, a small warehouse leased to a packaging company, and the house on Calvert Street in northwest Detroit where he had lived since 1971. Even at 83, he still mowed the lawn himself on Saturday mornings, saying, "The lawn doesn't care how old I am." He was not warm in the conventional sense. He did not say, "I love you" freely. He did not attend school plays or call on birthdays unprompted. What he was, instead, was present in a way that felt, as a child, like being taken seriously by the universe. When he looked at you, you felt accounted for. When he asked a question, he waited for the answer. I remember sitting at his kitchen table at 9 years old, struggling with long division, while he read the newspaper. "Celeste, what do you do when you can't see the path forward?" he asked. I said I didn't know. He said, "You stop moving and look at what you have. Not what you wish you had, what you actually have." I didn't understand it then. I wrote it down in a notebook when I was 22, during the worst year of my adult life. I have thought about it almost every day since. I am 41 years old, a licensed estate attorney in Michigan. The irony of my profession within this story is not lost. I have spent 14 years helping families navigate the very disputes that my own family dragged into court against me. My grandfather left me the house on Calvert Street and the warehouse on Livers Avenue, appraised together at $5.2 million at the time of his death. The house had appreciated dramatically with the neighborhood's revitalization, and the warehouse had been expanded and upgraded twice in the previous decade. He left 8 residential rentals to his surviving son, my Uncle Roderick, and 3 commercial buildings in equal thirds to Roderick's children, Damon and Brianna, and to a nonprofit vocational training organization he had supported for 12 years. My father, his eldest son, having passed away 7 years prior, received nothing of fact that would later be significant. The will was legitimate, drafted by probate attorney Sandra Yee, notarized, witnessed by 2 unrelated individuals, and filed with the Wayne County Probate Court 11 months before my grandfather's death. Sandra had known my grandfather for 9 years and had drafted 3 prior versions of the will, each carefully documented, reflecting the deliberate redistribution of assets as relationships and priorities evolved. Roderick filed the lawsuit 4 months after the funeral. To understand his actions, one must understand what the estate represented to him and what it did not represent to me. Roderick Whitmore, 66 years old, the younger of Ezra's 2 sons, stayed in Detroit, managed the properties as my grandfather's health declined, drove him to appointments, and sat with him during hospitalizations. He did all of this genuinely. He loved his father in a real, uncomplicated way. What Roderick also believed, and what no one had contradicted, was that proximity to care translated into proximity to inheritance. He expected recognition for his years of presence and support, a final accounting that outweighed the claims of grandchildren, nonprofits, and the niece whose father had predeceased the will. When the will was read, he received the 8 residential rentals worth approximately $3.1 million with the composed face of a man who had expected more and was calculating whether to speak. He said nothing during the reading or the repast. 3 weeks later, he called to ask in careful neutrality whether I had discussed the will with my grandfather. I had not. The entirety of my conversation with him years earlier had been that he wanted me to have the Calvert Street house because I was the only one who understood why he kept it. Roderick did not believe me. Before his call, he had already decided an explanation was necessary for why Sandra Yee's will looked the way it did, and the explanation he had chosen was me. The lawsuit alleged I had exercised undue influence over an elderly man in declining health, gained inappropriate access to his estate planning, and most chillingly, that the will filed in Wayne County Probate Court was materially altered or partially fabricated, that my grandfather's signature was forged or obtained under conditions rendering the document legally invalid. They accused me of forging my grandfather's will. I sat in my car in the office parking structure, staring at the complaint, the cold tightening in my hands. Simone Abe, my personal attorney, had reviewed the complaint twice before calling. She explained that the undue influence claim was standard contested will territory. The forgery allegation, however, was a different category of problem. I asked how they intended to support it. They had retained a document examiner. The 14 months between the complaint and the trial were heavy, each day a measure of endurance. Damon was 38 when the lawsuit was filed. We had been close as children, the kind of closeness that forms when two people share the same grandfather who treats both their opinions as worthy of attention. Adulthood had introduced distance, different cities, different lives, the ordinary drift. But we had never been hostile. We texted on holidays, shared tables at every family gathering for 30 years, then silence. Damon did not contact me after the lawsuit was filed, not to explain, not to distance himself, not even to acknowledge the obvious. His silence communicated clearly. Brianna, his sister, was different. She called 6 weeks in, on a Sunday night, to say, "Celeste, I'm not part of this. I want you to know that." She could not testify against her father, could not take sides publicly, but she was not participating. "Grandpa knew what he was doing," she said. Her voice quavered with the weight of her words. So did mine. Sleep became a fragile luxury. I ran, more than usual, early mornings before the office, sometimes 6 miles, sometimes more. The running was not about fitness. It was about channeling energy that had no other outlet. Farai, my colleague and running partner, 2 floors below in immigration law, joined me Tuesdays and Thursdays, speaking only of everyday things, unless I brought up the lawsuit. In those ordinary moments, her presence mattered more than I could measure. At work, caution was paramount. Partners knew of the lawsuit. There was no hiding it when your name was in court filings. They were formally supportive, treating me with professional steadiness. My managing partner, Henry Calloway, said privately, "The allegation is absurd to anyone who knows how you practice." It mattered, yet it was insufficient alone. My daughter, Imani, 11, sensed something was wrong. Children perceive tension in textures of moments, in pauses, and in attentions at dinner. On the way home from her swim practice, she asked, "Mom, is the thing with Uncle Roderick serious?" I replied, "Yes, but I'm handling it." Her trust, uncomplicated, in that single okay was more powerful than any reassurance. My ex-husband had been cooperative. 4 years divorced, civilly, with no drama, we had managed respect. He called to assure, "Whatever Imani needs, I've got her." Not concession, simply fact. That foundation allowed me to focus. The defense centered on Dr. Richard Holt, 63, a forensic document examiner, formerly a senior examiner in the FBI's document questioned unit for 21 years, with 340 federal and state cases, qualified as an expert witness in 29 states. He had convicted and exonerated, and was widely respected. Retained 8 months before trial, he spent 4 months analyzing the documents. The family's expert, Theodore Bosch, in private practice 11 years, mainly in insurance fraud, submitted a report claiming pen pressure patterns and letter formations in the will signature were inconsistent with Ezra Whitmore's prior estate documents. Bosch was careful. He did not say forged, only inconsistent. Yet Roderick's attorney, Colton Webb, equated inconsistent with and forged in opening statements. They were not the same. Dr. Holt's 47-page report, submitted 3 weeks before trial, explained exactly why. Dr. Holt examined not just the contested will, but 12 years of signature samples, personal letters, property transfer documents, tax filings, and the 3 prior will versions drafted by Sandra Yee. He reviewed my grandfather's hospital records, documenting the progression of essential tremor developed in his late 70s. These tremor variations, consistent across authenticated documents, were misinterpreted by Bosch as evidence of forgery. Holt demonstrated, with precision born of 21 years at the FBI, that the variations were predicted by the tremor. The contested signature matched authenticated samples with statistical confidence. There was no evidence of forgery. There was overwhelming evidence of a man signing his intentions, in his own hand, one last time. Sandra Yee testified to the drafting process. 4 meetings over 11 months, clear instructions about the Calvert Street house, meticulous contemporaneous notes, a man who knew exactly what he wanted. My uncle's attorney suggested professional proximity created undue influence. Simone objected. The judge, Honorable Diane Forsythe, sustained the objection with concise authority. Dr. Holt took the stand, precise and deliberate, explaining methodology, tremor documentation, and comparison with Bosch. Webb attempted cross-examination, claiming subjectivity, incomplete records, and expert disagreement. Holt answered calmly and thoroughly. When pressed about data not examined, Holt explained the difference was not interpretive, it was factual. Webb offered no follow-up, conceding with no further questions. I watched Roderick during testimony. He sat, hands folded, as recognition dawned. The story he believed, the narrative he had hired someone to tell, was not supported by the evidence. It was a quiet moment. The stillness of understanding loss, not conspiracy, not villainy, but the acceptance that his father had chosen differently. He had been compelled to believe a narrative to reconcile with disappointment. The moment was quiet but profound. Conspiracies have villains. Ezra Whitmore had none. He simply exercised judgment, deliberately, quietly, consistently. Understanding this did not bring relief. It brought a different kind of loss, the recognition that I could not even hold clean anger. Grief, in its many forms, was still grief, even when dressed up as litigation. Judge Forsythe ruled from the bench, at the close of testimony. Unusually, according to Simone, the will of Ezra James Whitmore filed with the Wayne County Probate Court was authentic, properly executed, and legally valid. There was no competent evidence supporting forgery. The undue influence claim had no basis. She noted verbatim that a forgery allegation of this nature, made against an estate attorney with no prior disciplinary history, constituted serious professional harm and had been advanced without evidentiary foundation. Sanctions followed. Roderick and his attorneys were ordered to pay $61,000 in defense costs. Roderick did not look at me as the ruling was delivered. He stood, gathered his attorney, and walked out with deliberate composure, giving away nothing. Damon, in the gallery, attended every day of the trial. When the ruling came down, he stood, and for the first time in 14 months, looked at me, not with apology, not with accusation, but with a look carrying things he had decided not to say. Then he followed his father out, and I did not see him again that day. Brianna texted at 4:17 that afternoon. "I'm so glad," I replied. "Thank you for calling me that Sunday." She responded with a single heart. Those messages remain on my phone as a careful record of what survived. 2 weeks later, Sandra Yee and I had dinner at a Thai restaurant on Cass Avenue. She ordered the same dish I did without consulting the menu, a subtle testament to shared familiarity. We discussed the case, her upcoming retirement, my daughter's swim meet, and another probate case complicated by family dynamics. At the end of the evening, she reminded me of my grandfather's foresight. He had chosen me because I would fight for what was right, even when it cost me. He had watched me since I was 9. I did not respond immediately. "He never told me that," I said. Sandra smiled. "No," she said, "but he told me. The house on Calvert Street is yours now. I have not moved into it. You have a home in Ferndale where Imani's life is rooted, and uprooting that for a symbolically significant property does not serve her. He was never sentimental. His concern was stewardship. I have refinished floors. Preserved the kitchen where I struggled with long division in 1991, and started registering the property as a historic site, a process my grandfather would have found both fitting and absurd. I mowed that lawn for 50 years, and I now pursue placing a plaque there. Stewardship matters. The warehouse on Liveroy's is leased to a manufacturing company producing electric vehicle components. I direct the income toward Imani's college fund and the vocational training nonprofit my grandfather named. I did not have to. I chose to, honoring the principle he valued, building foundations from the ground up, shaping skills, and investing in potential. My grandfather always knew what he was doing. What I lost in winning is harder to describe than what I kept. I lost a version of my family that existed in hope, potential, the possibility that shared years might bridge distance. The lawsuit closed that possibility. What remained was not hostility, but an acknowledged, finalized separation. I understand the accounting both professionally and personally. I know the weight of documents, the clarity of intention, the difference between what families say they want and what they act upon. My grandfather gave me the house he had kept for 50 years and the warehouse that had driven his final decade. He gave them to me not because I was the closest, most present, or loudest claimant, but because he had watched me since I was 9, noting when I could not see the path forward and observing what I actually had. For 14 months, I bore the courtroom accusation, labeled a forger by my uncle's attorney in Wayne County. Still, I run past Calvert Street on Tuesday mornings, 6 miles along a route that passes 3 blocks from the house, marking what belongs to me, without proving it. The lawn still needs mowing. I hired Earl, a retired gentleman who does 4 houses on the block, and had known my grandfather by sight for 20 years. He kept the best lawn on the street, Earl said. I told him my grandfather would have considered that a reasonable legacy. He laughed. You must be the granddaughter he talked about. I asked which one. The one who was going to be a lawyer, he said. Already decided, years ago before I knew it, before I understood fully myself. Like my grandfather, seeing what mattered and stating it plainly on a Saturday morning, while the grass was still wet. I finished my run, made breakfast for Imani, and drove her to her swim meet. She cut through the water with the precise efficiency of someone who understands resistance is not fought. It is moved through with enough skill that it barely notices you. She came in second in the butterfly, climbed out of the pool, and immediately found my face in the bleachers. 2 hands raised, a real smile, everything, and I gave her what I had to give.